Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about how to layer in Gouache, specifically how to make the top layer more opaque and doesn't mix up with the bottom layers. So without further ado, let's get started. So tip number 1 is to wait for the previous layer to dry completely. And I'm gonna use this painting to demonstrate the difference between letting the previous layer dry first versus putting the new layer down while the previous one is still wet. As you can see here, instead of waiting for my first layer to dry completely, I'm going straight in trying to paint some trees with a darker blue. And those trees just kind of blend in with the previous layer. They have a cauliflower effect around their edges, and they don't really add depth to the painting. Now in this second painting, I waited for the layer to dry first, and as I go in, you can see that the trees are more opaque. They are separate from the previous layer. They have very defined edges, and they are also darker even though I use almost the same mixtures. Tip number 2 is to mix a thicker mixture of color for every new layer that you put down. Going back to my first painting, which has already dried completely. Even though the previous layer is not wet anymore, when I use a watery mixture to add the new layer on top, the tree is still very transparent and very light. You can almost see the background color underneath it. No matter how dark I mix the mixture, if it's too watery, it still won't be opaque. Now in the same painting, I'm gonna use pretty much the same color, but just make it less watery and thicker. And as you can see, the new tree that we're adding in on the left side is much more opaque and much more defined than the one that we add on the right hand side. The third tip is to use fewer brushstrokes. Here I'm going to use the same thick mixture that I just used to paint the tree on the left hand side. However, instead of just using 1 or 2 down brushstrokes, I'm actually using many brushstrokes on the same tree just over and over again. And because Gouache can get reactivated fairly easily, by using many brushstrokes like this, I'm actually reactivating the blue background behind it, which makes the tree on the far left has a little bit of blue in it, and it also makes the tree a little bit transparent. So if you want your next layer to be opaque and not mix in with the previous layer, try to use as few brushstrokes as you can, or switch to a bigger brush if you need to. The fourth tip is to be patient and build multiple layers on top of each other. In this painting, the forest floor only has 1 layer so far, and you can see that the floor is fairly light and there's some white spot from the paper underneath it showing through. Because Gouache tend to dry a different color, so the forest floor is now lighter when it dried than when I first put it down, and it is not the right tone compared to everything else around it. Now if I'm going straight in and adding the tree and the leaf on top of this layer, just like this, it's gonna look out of place. Nothing is cohesive, and patching it up with more details on top like this just making it worse. Switching to our second painting, instead of going straight in and adding all the details and the tree like the previous one, I'm going to put down another layer to add more dimension and also different color onto the forest floor. Notice that I do this even before adding in all those brown dark tree like in the previous painting. I also use this opportunity to push the value of the forest floor to make it darker in the front and the side and lightest in the center. Now I'm painting the darker trees while keeping in mind that I need to use a thicker mixture, less water, and also use fewer brushstrokes. The painting has more depth now and everything looks a lot more cohesive compared to the last one. The next tip is to know your color opacity. Not all colors have the same opacity, and it's usually indicated in the back of the paint tube. The half black and white square on the top indicates that the red paint is semi-transparent, while the bottom one means that the blue paint is opaque. It may be a little bit more hidden and harder to see in some brand, For example, in this one, instead of the square, it actually these two little circles on the side of the tubes. The top one shows that the opera color is transparent, so it's almost like watercolor, while the bottom one means that it's semi-transparent. This is important because right now if I use a transparent color, even if I wait for the previous layer to dry, use a thicker mixture, and also use fewer brushstrokes, it may still not be able to achieve the opacity that I would like. So the way around this is to kind of combine all the things that we've talked about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this pink tree in multiple layers, while patiently waiting for the previous one to dry. And also to make the opera color more opaque, for the shadow part, I'm adding a little bit burnt sienna and lamp black to the mixture, while for the lighter part, I'm adding titanium white. All of these extra colors all have a high opacity as indicated on their tubes, and by mixing them to my transparent opera, I'm making the mixture as a whole become more opaque. And when I'm done with the first layer on the pink tree, I'm going to wait for it to dry. And in the meantime, because now our green layer at the bottom is already dry, I'm going in and add some texture for the forest floor. I'm also adding foliage and leaf around the trees for more details. Now when that first layer of the pink tree is already dry, I'm going back in mixing more titanium white to my opera to add a lighter pink layer on top of the previous one. And again, now I'm waiting for that light pink layer to dry, while going back to the forest floor and add more on top of it. It's kind of a long back and forth process, but just be patient and enjoy yourself. This is likely the stage that you get to add all those little needy details, which to me is the most fun part of the painting. And now for the last layer, to make the highlight on the pink, I'm using a lot of titanium white with just a little bit of opera pink. And remember to use less and less water as you add more layers. And here is our final painting. And just for comparison purposes, I'm going to show you what would happen if I just pile in colors and colors on top of each other instead of doing it the slow and patient way. Even if I'm mixing titanium white to my opera to make the color more opaque, it still looks like a mess. Now keep in mind that all these tips make sense for our purposes, which is to make the next layer more opaque than the previous one. However, it doesn't mean that doing the opposite of what I've been saying is necessarily bad or wrong. There's just different techniques for different looks that you're trying for. In a lot of my previous videos, I talk about how to paint wet on wet, for example. And in those videos, I just go straight in when the previous layer is still wet, because what I wanted out of those paintings are different from this one. So I would definitely recommend try doing it both ways and experience different style, technique, See which one you like and what is best for the painting that you're working on. And that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider like and subscribe and share it with your friends. And let me know in the comments if you have any question or what would you like to see in the next videos. Thank you, and I'll see you all later.